All right, good morning, everybody. We are live now for our audience here at Tennessean.com. Thank you so much to Jeremy Kane, mayoral candidate, to our editorial board members, Laura Hollingsworth, Frank Daniel, Stephanie Murray. Maria DeVarine is out of town, but the editorial board is here to speak to every single candidate for Nashville mayor. And our purpose today is not to ask a scripted set of questions, but rather to really have a conversation about you as a leader, you as someone in terms of your vision and your plans. This is a time where you're not going to be limited to 60-second sound bites. We're really going to be focusing on deeply into what are you going to do for the city, and why would you be the best mayor? And actually, it's appropriate that we have you as the first candidate because your commercial just came out where you say that all the other folks are the same, but you stand out. Right. And I'd love to explore that a little bit about, why do you stand out? And if we could, throughout this process, I'll ask editorial board members, this is organic, feel free to jump in, interrupt. Let's make this as informal as possible, just so we can really get at some deep questions that we want to address.
So there's not someone with a buzzer or a stop sign here at some point, and I can go on. Very good. Good. No, so.
I think you might have one back there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, very good. No, I mean, the ad was meant to be fun, and it's something you guys have talked a lot about. We've heard it, is that this race has kind of been slow to develop, especially with 7 candidates, and it's hard for voters to find those differences. Obviously, we've done, I think, 48 forums. Not everybody has gone to every single one. I think us being there all 48 times, in the most cases, there are some differences and nuances, and we wanted to have some fun and at the beginning of the ad and wanted to sort of send a message that I am different, and I'm different because I've stood up, and not just to start a group of charter schools, but stood up when people were saying everything was fine in public education. And over 10 years ago, people were saying very similar things, is we just need more cheerleaders, and the stats say that we're doing just fine. And when I stood up and said we're not, and the kids deserve better, we had some folks downtown and at the chamber and other places that cautioned me and said, you're going to upset the apple cart, and we just need to sort of give it one more year. And I think that makes a difference, and that's part of the reason why I'm running, is we've got some big challenges in front of us as a city, and we can't wait another year or 4 years or 8 years to start addressing transit and education, keeping Nashville affordable, and making sure we pull Nashville together. So that was the real message of the ad. I think being young is an advantage. I think it's how we feel in the city right now. I think we feel energetic, feel dynamic. That was part of what we wanted to do. And we were talking earlier, is I think one of the benefits of my campaign is it's been authentic from the very beginning. I haven't tried to be someone or something that I'm not. I've never run for office before. We haven't shied away from that. I'm the youngest candidate in the race. We haven't shied away from that. I don't have the personal wealth that every other candidate has, or the name recognition. We have embraced that as an advantage. And I think that ad gets it across. It's very stark, very efficient. And I like, my mom said it was elegant, so I'm going to add that in there too. But I think it just gets that message across in a very brief time, that we're different and proud to be so.
So, thanks for bringing up the age thing, because I think it is what I hear most from people around the community: attractive but young. So, one of the things I think many people are curious about: you get in the runoff, you win the runoff. Who are the people around you that you would bring into the mayor's office that would balance, perhaps, in many people's minds, that youth that the youth you bring? I mean, you could well be bringing youth and vigor, but some people do want to see some old heads around. So who are those folks?
Well, let me go backwards first. And people told me I was too young when I was trying to compete in the Olympics, and I proved them wrong. People said I was too young at 25 and 26 and didn't have experience to start a school and run it, and proved them wrong. I think in this campaign, like we said, I think the youth is less of a concern than the experience, and I've gotten much more comfortable talking about being in business and being a CEO, being an executive. And I'd point to my record at LEAD. I've said it repeatedly, I'm not an educator. I don't have a teaching license. If I had tried to run the education side of LEAD, we would not have been very successful. I found smart people, I hired them, I empowered them, I held them accountable. On our board of directors, found very smart people that could connect to different communities. Judge Richard Dinkins was and is still on LEAD's board. This was a guy who sued public school systems to desegregate them, fought to block charters, but put him around the table in our cabinet and our board so that I didn't have someone that automatically agreed with me. Dwayne Tucker, who was HR executive around the country, someone that had been there, dealt with employee issues, and that could really mentor me and work with me, and others throughout the community. Claire Tucker at Capstar Bank is a huge mentor to me. So I think I have a record of reaching out to people much smarter than me. I've said it repeatedly. I said at the debate last week, good poets borrow and great poets steal. And I've stolen a lot of great ideas, but also stolen a lot of great people's time and energy to really reach out. So who specifically? I think that's one of my advantages. I'm the only candidate out there who hasn't promised a job to someone, and I won't. And so if you're looking for a particular name for finance director or for deputy mayor, I'm not going to give it. I think the type of person that I'm looking for is someone that has the talent that covers it. We need a finance administrator, obviously, who understands municipal finance. We have folks in the finance department that can do that today. I'd love to try to convince some folks there that maybe to take a step forward and take a step up. I look to someone like a Kevin Lavender, who has government experience. If he's watching now, I apologize to his wife who's going to scream at me. But someone that has government experience, someone that has business experience, someone that's been there, that knows when we need to push the gas pedal, maybe when we need to turn the blinker, but also understands that when a situation comes, sometimes it's okay to be calm, take a deep breath, let things work out. So I think people like that, people I trust like Clayton McWhorter, someone that's been around for a very long time that I reach out and talk to and trust. I think I've built that within our finance committee and our support. I like to joke I'm the only one that President Clinton supports and David Ingram. You couldn't get much different than those two. But yet, bringing people together, having that collaborative approach, I think that's the type of a government, type of team that I would want, is to have that balanced approach, is that not everybody is going to agree. I think that's something I bring to the table from my experience at LEAD, having worked in politics as well, is that you can reach across the aisle, you can bring people together. It's okay to have dissent. It's okay to reach out to the neighborhood. I think we saw that recently with some of the decisions that the council made, that it's okay to reach out within the neighborhood first and get that feedback. It's not always as easy, but it's an important step in the process. So I think far less of who in particular that I would bring to the table and more who I trust, what kind of relationship would I want in City Hall, and reaching out to others.
Where we can go?
I was going to say, speaking about budgeting and finance, obviously the budget, debt, these things are huge issues for any mayor. And one of the things, Jeremy, that I don't think I've heard you or many of the candidates talk deeply about is articulating how well you understand the city budget and how you might get up to speed on some of these areas. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of talk lately with the flood wall and the other things that Mayor Dean has proposed and have come before City Council and that sort of spending. Could you talk a little bit about how you as mayor would handle some of the budgeting and the money side, and tell us about your background, articulate a little bit about that.
Right, so good. So yeah, let me start with my background there is, started LEAD and grew it from essentially my living room into a $16 million organization that received the majority of its money in public dollars. So I think that's important, is we were a public school with public dollars, had to manage according to government rules, government contracting in some cases. And yes, charter schools have some flexibility, but we are also required in a lot of instances to follow similar rules that we'd have to follow when I'm mayor. So I think that's very important. It was a dynamic budget. It was a big budget. We created over 200 jobs. I think that's an important piece that I have not heard reported and people have sort of looked past, is that there are now over 300 people that are reporting to work in August at an organization that I helped create. So I think that's important, knowing how to create jobs, knowing how to manage that budget, and also understanding the responsibility of going to bed at night, knowing that people depend on you and that they're paying their mortgages and they're taking care of their kids because of the work that you're doing, the job you helped create and partner with them to do. So I think that's a responsibility that I bring to the table and we'll think about as mayor, is it's not just about dollars and cents. I've heard some of the other candidates talk about, this 200 million or that statistic. Those dollars and those statistics have real people behind them. It affects it. When we're talking about putting $1 billion into fixing sewers, we saw that in Green Hills when the pipes busted. That's people's ability to take a shower, their daily life and going through it. So I think that's a difference I bring to the table, and how I've managed a budget is to always remember that goes back to people. I think going forward, how would I manage it? We need a thoughtful finance director, finance administrator that doesn't just see today's issues, but really plans long term. I've talked a lot about this. I think we're at a transition point in Nashville's history. I've talked a lot about 30 years ago when I moved here with Mayor Fulton and sort of what I think he led us over the last 30 years rather. I think we're at that moment where we're looking forward the next 30 years. And so I think paying off that debt, said it in the first interview we had here, said it the first day I announced it, is the number one issue is our debt. And how we pay that off and continue to make the investments in education and infrastructure. Absolutely, I do, because I think any one of us could make some decisions that would put us in trouble. And I think it has to be managed very, very carefully. But I think as important how we pay the bills and how we make those investments is how we communicate those choices we make. And that ultimately is what it goes back to, is I believe the next mayor has to be a great communicator, because he or she is going to have to tell all of us in Nashville why we're investing in sewers, why we're not necessarily investing in an incentive package for a company here, but instead really taking a long look at transit, why it's going to be one step after another, really being able to say the progress in education is every year, year over year, we're getting better, because I think a lot of times we want sort of a big project or a big win and sort of check it off the box and say we're done.
How do you feel about incentives like that, corporate incentives?
I'm in favor of, I'm in favor of them. I think we need more accountability around them. And obviously I was the only candidate that had questions around Bridgestone. And not because I didn't want Bridgestone to stay here, not because I didn't think that they needed an incentive package. I looked at it more as, and have said repeatedly, incentives should not just be about a ribbon cutting or about jobs alone. It should be about the effect that it's having on our community, on our neighborhoods, on our schools, on our transit system, and our infrastructure. And I looked at that and said that taking away 20 years of property taxes for our schools, I thought about it in terms of my 3-year-old daughter and the other kids that would go through 18 years of public education and not see $1 from that. And I understand, and I've heard the screams and the yells and gotten the phone calls and nasty emails that sales tax and all the other things that are beneficial from that deal. And I agree with that completely. I just think if we say that we're for education and it's our number one priority, we have to reflect that in every single thing we do. I think also with transit, I think education and transit, going back to how we manage the next 30 years, they can be transformative. I talked about this at the debate last week. When we look at economic development over the last 30 years, when we look at investments in downtown, I think we've seen the transformative effect of that. Mayor Bredesen then talked about, sort of the bomb dropped at Bridgestone and the ripple effects going outward. I think education and transit will be those next ripple effects going forward. And so on Bridgestone, I talked about could we have Bridgestone do what Vanderbilt University does and subsidize employees to have a bus pass. You're talking about 1,700 employees coming in and out of downtown during rush hour. What a great commitment to investing in public transit. What about an additional incentive if people live downtown? Then you folks don't have to have a car. You're investing in making downtown a neighborhood because we need public space, more art, grocery stores, schools, all of that. So I see incentives in a much broader way instead of very transactional.
So you made a point about the sewers, talking about those things. One of the criticism that Mayor Dean has received about things like the flood protection system and the jail and the police HQ and the AMP has been that he didn't do enough community building. Sure. What might you have done differently, or how would you approach projects differently in order to build community support and make sure that those things pass?
Can I add to that? I mean, are you for a new jail, and are you for a new police headquarters?
Yes, on a new police headquarters. Obviously on both of those, we've got to go back to the drawing board. I think on the jail, the money's been appropriated to renovate downtown. I think it needs it. It's important to renovate it. We need to protect folks who are there, as well as the employees in the sheriff's office. I think that's important, and glad the council did that after the vote.
To renovate and not build new.
Yeah, I think that's where it is right now. I think, coming in.
Did you want to see a new center versus the renovation, given the investments and the return and all the pieces?
No, you mean move it down to Antioch? No, I thought the process wasn't appropriate. I think people hadn't had a chance really to weigh in. You never want to surprise people with a project, let alone a project this big, especially in the neighborhood. And I heard a lot of people around downtown in terms of very simple things with the public defenders. Would they be reimbursed to go see their clients in Antioch? Just simple things. Where would prisoners be released? Is it in Antioch or would it be downtown? Just simple questions like that, I think, really went to, David, your question is, the community really hadn't had time to discuss it and reflect on it, let alone kind of think through some of these really important decisions that seem small but have an incredible impact. So I think the story I was going to tell on the flood protection system is we had a debate at Rotary 2-3 weeks ago, and each one of us said the flood wall. And afterwards, talked to someone in the Dean administration, they said it's not a flood wall, it's a flood protection system. And I think that started giving me an indication that we'd sort of gotten off track in terms of the communication, that it's part of a much larger system. It's a pump station, it's a flood wall, but it's also part of the buyback program. And I think what would I have done differently is I would have put it in the context of a much broader continuing investment we're making as a city in protecting each of us as well as our property across the county. We've already spent close to $30 million, I think, in buying back homes in the floodplains. So $30 million plus this pump station plus flood wall plus future investment, because we can't just stop. I know Ryman has made investments out in Donaldson and Hermitage. So I think we missed that broader context of saying this is part of a big countywide comprehensive system that if I were Mayor Dean would have said this does not end when I walk out of this office and this will not stop when the next mayor goes there. So I think putting that in the context, I talked about the jail. I think it was the end of a term. I think already people had talked a lot about the debt and raising it. I think did not get ahead of that conversation when you added $100 million plus $100 million plus another 20, 30 million on the jail. I think just in people's minds it added up. I would have started in the community very early on, probably not waited till the last year of my term and last couple of months. To really reach out. And that's one of the things I've talked a lot about of having this Office of Neighborhoods, Nonprofits, and Faith, is really to pull together those community resources, really build on Nashville's strengths. We're a city of neighborhoods. We saw that on Jefferson Street. We saw that in Antioch. We even saw that downtown with the flood wall and flood protection. We're a city of nonprofits and caring and compassionate city. We're also a place where we have over 700 places of worship. And I think that's a way to really start the conversation and communicate and collaborate.
So are you going to, as mayor, would you take the flood protection plan forward? And
I think we need to
continue that
revisit it.
conversation?
I think we can't just sit here and say that a flood's not going to happen. I think we need to revisit it. I said it's a both-and solution. One of my concerns was I didn't hear anybody anywhere talking about people. I heard a lot about property and protection of downtown. I didn't hear about people. My wife and I go to church at St. George's, and there were 2 people that perished driving to church that morning of the flood.
11 people died.
Exactly, and they would not be here today with the flood wall or the pump station downtown. And I wanted that question answered, which is they would not be here with that. That we need to invest in a first alert system. We still haven't done that. I've visited with folks in Bellevue and Pennington Bend whose lives are still ruined and they can't ever get their houses back because of the flood and what happened there. So that's why I said I don't think it's an either or approach, and I think that's how the debate got couched and was allowed to get couched. To me, it's a both and. So I'd like to revisit it by talking about people first, about making investments and protecting you and me and all the viewers at home.
With the jail, you mentioned that you wouldn't put in Antioch, and there's issues with obviously not talking to that community before that announcement was made. But do you support the economic side of the argument for building a new jail, and would you take that forward, putting it somewhere else potentially in the county?
I think we'd have to look at it. I'd like to study it and look at it. Obviously, begin the conversation in the community because there's a couple other sites, that have been proposed.
Yes, there are.
I think one of the concerns I started to have was as I spent a lot of time in Antioch, people were asking to see the study. People were asking just for some basic information, and I think basic questions. And I think that's something we need to start with, which is explaining why this 20-year-old jail is already fallen into disrepair. We need to really have that conversation. We need to have the conversation around where's the best place for that jail to be. How do we protect people? How do we protect neighborhoods? I think Antioch is on the upswing. I think some of the concern was very much, what does this mean for my neighborhood, my property values? People want to always couch it as not in my backyard problem. I think if anything's going in Sylvan Park where we live or the nations, I make sure I'm aware of it just to know what's happening in the neighborhood. So I don't want to say that folks in Antioch, reacted poorly or incorrectly. If this were going in my neighborhood, I would have been at meetings. I would have raised these tough questions. So I think as a new mayor, starting that conversation early and being honest that this investment, just like the flood wall, does not go away. Police headquarters doesn't go away. I've actually said, what about the Ben West Library downtown? That's sat vacant for quite a while. It's a great property. It's a historic property because of the charter and the way it's listed. Has to exist and has to have a library. But it could be community space as we continue downtown development, but could be a way that makes it walkable, and really reuses one of the historic buildings.
So would you then say, if you don't want to put a jail in Antioch, should we move the 1,000 prisoners that are there away from there, since Antioch doesn't want anybody? So we should close that facility and move them away, find another place for that?
I think that long term, that's got to be part of the conversation. Not making a decision today. I think that was one of the things. There already are folks out there. I think security out there, we don't hear much about it. But I go back to the questions that were raised, and especially in light of what happened at Woodland and in Bordeaux, and was at several community meetings there. And the questions that weren't answered, the questions around security and safety. I applaud CCA, I applaud Darren Hall and the Sheriff's Department for making it safe in Antioch. But I think those questions long term, we need to look at it holistically. We need to look at it in a comprehensive way instead of just kind of dropping this in right at the end.
So, of course, we've been talking about signing a jail there for 6 years, as far as I know, but that's okay. I wanted to go back to your concern about the flood protection system, where the UFPP, the Unified Flood Protection Plan, which engaged hundreds, maybe over 1,000 community members in coming up with that system.
Right.
One of the first things that they recommended was an alert program. The mayor has invested millions of dollars in the SAFE system, which is an alert system, and but yet you don't think that we have an alert system from what you just said.
I think people don't know, much about it. I think people aren't aware of it. I think you talked about it. We've been talking about it 6 years. A lot of people didn't know that. I bet you if you polled a lot of people, they wouldn't know about that. I think that goes back to how I would manage as mayor is it's about making sure that you get the information out there. You can't just put a public notice in the Tennessean or put it on the nightly news and expect everybody to know about it. I think that's something that we've seen where Mayor Dean's been successful in past mayors. It has been out there constantly talking about it. It's about making sure that people are aware of it, making sure that when floods happen, like what happened in Madison just recently, that people are aware of it, that the systems are working, that you're able to work together, you're learning from it. So, I disagree with that. You've said 6 years, you say the alert system, all of that. Not a lot of people know about this. The conversation in the community were very much taken by surprise. So I think that investment, to me, it may have been done on paper, and this goes back to how to manage financially, how I would manage with people, is it's not enough to have a decision behind closed doors. It's not enough for you all to know about it. We have to engage the community in it. We have to have that involvement. I think we're seeing some of that pushback right now around Nashville Next. I think a lot of people, myself included, were at community meetings. We're involved in the process. And yet we hear this all the time. Well, I didn't know about it and do it. Does that mean that community wasn't engaged? No. Does it mean we maybe could learn from that? And I think Nashville Next was a great process in terms of engaging online. I know you all did your part, community meetings at the libraries and schools, even some fun, what does it, make your pick, kind of marketing campaign that really engaged people. I think we have to learn from that. I'm talking about social media before. I think really having a mayor and a mayor's office that can engage multiple forms of media and connections. Mayor Bloomberg did this when he was mayor in New York. It was a hashtag 311 where people could use Twitter to report a pothole. They could use it to make an alert to the police department. They could call codes or text codes about that. The mayor also had a Ask Mike. and he would respond. He had a radio show. I think there's a way that we have to over communicate in this day and age. I think in a lot of ways that we haven't done that.
So you may be familiar with Sam Adams from Portland, Oregon. When he was mayor there, he would actually personally respond to tweets.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself as the mayor who would personally respond to tweets?
I want to be very careful on promises here.
This question of
It's a
communication.
really important
Sure.
question, actually. Yeah, I mean, I'm piggybacking off that. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about is there are so many newcomers in this city. As we
Absolutely.
know, so many people are moving here every day and every week, and the diversity in our city is changing.
Absolutely.
And we have such a diverse population, and that's growing every day.
Yeah.
And a lot of those folks, unfortunately, our studies show aren't civically engaged.
Right.
And you don't hear them, and they're not at the community forums. And so getting at, David's question, how would you as mayor make sure that those voices are represented from, different racial groups, ethnic groups that
Right.
are moving to our city and may not be the ones who have the loudest voices?
Right. Well, no, and I think social media is a great place to start and a great sort of template to learn from. It's immediate. You can reach out and you can be there and you can have that conversation. I won't promise that I'll respond to every tweet personally, but I do think that account is important, and having a mayor that understands the power and the possibility of that medium. I think I've talked a lot about opening, kind of kicking the halls of government open and being very transparent with our data. We saw it in Oakland with some hackers got a hold of some of the crime data and started plotting where the crime was happening in the city. And the government's first response was to try to sue them and shut it down. And then the police department found it and said, actually, we can use this to partner with our Comstat data, and found a way to work with it. And now they're opening more and more data troves within the government. We're seeing that with Yahweh Ye and Christine Lalonde. I think we've only tapped the surface of that data in terms of engaging people to come into government or to partner with government that may not want to work there, but want to engage with the data in a new way. I think that's really, really important. I think, honestly, that's a place where being young is an important factor, is to be able to say to folks, you too can be part of government. You can be young, you can make it a career, you
Be an
can...
accessible mayor.
Exactly. And I think last night, David, you were there at the New Americans Forum. 700 people, it was packed, it was standing room only, and just to come out to a forum. It's been incredible just to see the reaction there. But the questions, the multiple translations, the organization, I think it was over 30 partnered together. I don't know another city in America where you would have had that. And so I think that's a real opportunity for what we can do. I think what we see at Casa Asafran with a pre-K, as well as the businesses, the health clinic, we see it in the multilingual crosswalk, just sending messages that all are welcome, all are encouraged to be involved. I think a mayor, and this is one where Mayor Dean has done such a good job, is being visible in the community. I was proud to stay for the iftar last night after the forum, and just making sure our Muslim brothers and sisters understand that when I'm mayor, we'll respect all faiths, we'll respect all traditions. That's been very important. I think Mayor Dean has started that, and the next mayor must continue it. And I think in terms of the millennials, I think it's exciting. I think, you said last week almost 40% of our population will be or is going to be under the age of 30. When we think about that, I think about my daughter a lot at 3. And if Google and Uber have their way, she'll never own a car, let alone know how to drive a car. That's exciting to me when we think about how we plan infrastructure and how we think about transportation, how we think about education.
Will you reflect the diversity of our city on the team you bring in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very proud of the team. Let me start at LEAD just for experiences. I think a record's important. I talked a little bit about our board of directors. We had racial diversity, age diversity, gender diversity. Incredibly proud of our team at LEAD that was led. We had diversity there. Proud at Cameron, have told the story multiple times. We hired the first Kurdish American office manager, and we had a third of our students speaking Arabic. And somewhat stunning to me that we hired the first and only at that time. But I saw the power and talked with a few folks after the debate last night, just the power of what it means to parents and to people when you call your child's school and you hear someone who can speak your own language and what that says and the value it brings to the table. We also hired 5 of our 8 first employees at Cameron were bilingual in Spanish. Same thing, when you can speak the language, we saw parent engagement go through the roof. And it was not because we reached out any differently than we did at Lead Academy in North Nashville. I think it really was language. I think it's that we said you have people here who will understand you, who will communicate with you. So I think the same thing comes in, as mayor. I've said that I'm not going to hire a chief diversity officer. I think that's what politicians do. I want to be transparent, and we've had a pretty sobering report from the Human Relations Commission. And I think having that continually updated and monitored, I think you and the media have to do that. This will not be fixed automatically and overnight, but we have to go out and start saying we need you in government, and that's everyone. We have to have a government that reflects Nashville's diversity, and that's just not one box, and that's just not one place. I think it really is sending that message. And that's something that we did is we stepped back and said we needed for our students, for the success of our school, more African and American males in our schools. And we looked around and realized that if we just waited for the universities or just waited for basic recruiting, we would never get there. So we reached out to TSU, we reached out to Fisk, we really started partnerships. We worked with the YMCA to really find mentors for our kids. Harold Love, it's where we became such good friends, is he found a way to reach into the churches and with other ministers that we didn't just wait. We actually were proactive. We went out and made a big difference. So I'm proud of the record at Lead, proud of what I learned there, and I think coming into the mayor's office, I'd bring that fresh approach, that creative approach.
Different type of diversity is rural versus urban, and you mentioned Nashville Next, and one of the issues that almost could have derailed it was the Whites Creek issue, and that was, do you allow, because at a later date it could get amended to go from rural to suburban.
Right.
How would you see yourself carrying out that process? Because in the 8 years that you may serve, there's going to be a lot of requests to amend Nashville Next, a lot of requests to urbanize in some areas, and there are some people who just want Nashville the way it currently is.
Right.
How do you approach that? How do you develop the community support? And let's say a councilman says, I would like this to have more development. What is your role in addressing that?
Yeah, well, I'll start with, I think that's this, as important as the mayor's races, and obviously I'm all in on that, the council races are incredibly important as well. I know we have a race in my home district in Sylvan Park that's important for the future of our city. We have some major developments happening on the edges of our community, and those decisions that will be made by the council in large part. Zoning is the province of the council, and that's a place where we've had a good set of mayors who have been hands-off, and that's again where I will be as mayor. Is you don't ever want a mayor that puts his or her thumb on a zoning decision, because you do it once and it will happen repeatedly, and we've seen cities get out of control on that. So I think part of that is just to say to the viewers, to the readers, how important the council districts are, especially that one, because I think it's such an incredible advantage to Nashville to have rural space. I forget oftentimes that we still have working farms in the agricultural community within Davidson County. Where else can you go with a city like ours and find that diversity? Be able to go 10 minutes down the road and be in Bells Bend, and also go to Percy Warner or Shelby, or have pocket parks in Edge Hill. So I think those are incredibly important. I would love to see that heritage continue, the rural parts of our county stay that way, but also allow for that conversation to occur. And I think that's where the council really leads that discussion, where we look at it. I think an area where the mayor can and should be involved, in one area that I love to see more of, is connecting the greenways, and finding a way to do it in a way that's sensitive to the environment there, where it works with the environment, much like what Mayor Dean has done with the bike trails and Bells Bend. Is it works with the environment instead of over the top of it. So I think the greenways are important. We've had a lot of conversations in our community meetings up there, and about transit, about protecting the look and the feel of Whites Creek and Jolton, but also making sure that you don't have to travel 10, 15 miles to go pick up a gallon of milk. I think transit, having a safe place to stand, having a safe place to get picked up, and what does the bus service look like? How do we get people to and from those communities? So I think for me, it'd be, I always tried to manage what I called guardrails, right? It's not necessarily rules or demands. It was very much, this is the direction we're going, and that's where I see the Nashville Next plan is. It's a good set of guardrails directing us in the future, knowing that at some cases in some communities we will have to have a conversation to change it, amend it, update it, and I'd love to be part of that process, but understanding there's a specific role a mayor should play.
The nation's largest zoning board, there's a charter amendment to
Took me a second there, that's good.
to reduce it to 27
Right.
members, so that each council member perhaps would represent more people. Is that something that you think would be a smart idea for Nashville, dumb idea?
Yeah, I don't know that I couch it in those terms. I think it's, and I've said this repeatedly, I think I said it from the beginning, we've had this form of government for 50 years, and it's been probably one of the biggest reasons why we've been successful. The city consolidated government. There have been times where 40 probably seems too big, sometimes seems too small. I've been in favor of letting the voters vote, and I think I'm glad it's on the ballot. I know we have two competing charter amendments to vote on. Having the conversation with term limits as well, I think is an appropriate time. My concern about this is I was hoping this would spark a bigger conversation. I'm nervous about voters voting on this without a lot of information behind it and the impact it will mean. That was really something when I said before, put it on the ballot, it was much more, we'd have a lot more community meetings, we'd have a lot more conversation, a little debate. I wanted some folks that have been around when the first charter was passed and designed to really say this was the beauty of it, these were the compromises, this is why we did what we did. Because I don't think we've had that discussion yet, so I'm nervous. I can play out the scenarios why 27 works and why 40 works. I worry about not having that conversation, and
It was a long time ago when they made the compromises to settle at 40.
Right.
To accommodate
Right.
more politicians on the council.
It's an important question, and I think it deserves more conversation. It deserves more conversation than just a vote, because it will change things. And I think we're a great city. We'll move forward either way. If elected, I'll continue to serve as mayor, whether they're 27 friends or 40. But I do think it deserves that conversation. Term limits deserve that conversation. This kind of pops up every 4, 8, 12 years around the country. It's an interesting question. Someone was joking, I liked it, is you spend 4 years figuring out what to do, and then you're immediately a lame duck when you're reelected. I think zoning, and especially with Nashville Next, and we're talking about transportation and investments and infrastructure and debt, do we maybe need to look at allowing folks to serve a third term? I think that's something that's interesting. I think it could have its advantages because you get some folks that really do understand it. I also say this as someone new and young and trying to break in. We do need new blood. We do need competitive elections. We do need a way that people can step up who aren't career politicians, who don't have a famous last name or a bank account, to be able to get involved in politics.
Can you talk a little bit about, let's go deeper into your education vision, because you obviously have a lot of education experience with lead charter schools. You'll likely have a new superintendent, maybe July
Right.
if the process works out, and
Right.
come September, the new mayor and the new superintendent will have to work together.
Right.
How does that relationship work, and how do you measure success, let's say after 4 years and then after 8 years?
Yeah, no, great question. And I've said it repeatedly, the most important relationship in Nashville is between the new mayor and the new superintendent. And I've pledged that whoever that is, we will partner together and we'll find a way to make it work. And I think it's looking now, I think Mayor Dean and Dr. Register don't get enough credit for where we're ending up based on where we started. I mean, when Mayor Dean came into office, the state was about to take over the school system. And then you had Dr. Register come in, and I don't think he's ever gotten enough credit for pulling this district out of the ditch that Dr. Garcia left us in. A lot of incredible talent ran away, was chased away. And Dr. Register has brought back some incredible talent. I talk a lot about Robin Wall and Michelle Wall and some of our other principals and teachers, and just bringing it back. The talent level here, I haven't seen anywhere around the country. So I think that partnership has to work. It's got to be a great relationship where we can't go into this in the future and say the mayor's only in control of a budget and then the superintendent's in charge and school board of everything else. This is an all of the above, everybody on board approach. And I think managing that relationship in a collaborative way is important. I've talked about the cabinet meeting I'd hold on the first day of office. I want this new superintendent to be part of that, because I think those conversations between a superintendent and, say, Steve Bland at MTA, when you're talking about how we expand the STRIDE program, they need to design that. I need to support that, obviously weigh in, but those conversations are powerful and important. When we're talking about the Casey redevelopment project, that's an important piece. There's a school there, there's nonprofits there. It will affect our education system, so they need to be part of that conversation and that collaboration, because if we continue to just go forward and say we're going to fix transportation just with a bus or light rail or sidewalks, we're going to miss the impact of what that means and the access and opportunity of being able to choose your school, being able to choose your neighborhood and where you can go to work. So I think that partnership really does infuse everything we do going forward. And I've said it, repeatedly. I said it last night. My education plan is very simple. It's about that relationship, and it's about providing the same level of flexibility we enjoyed as charter schools, and some of the other public schools enjoy as well.
Can I press on the, obviously the communication on the schools thing has become to the general public at times, either charter or public, and a lot of discussion around that, et cetera. Right. Can you play out your vision, having been involved on the charter side, but dealing with superintendent? Where do the public schools go? Now you've got Project Reset. Where would you, in a perfect world, in 8 years, where would you play out the system and the process of both? Or is there room for both? And how does that look in your mind?
Yeah, I think it's, so I've never seen, and I don't really, it never made sense to me not to assume that charter schools were public schools. And I'm sure sparked some debate around that conversation, but we're public schools. And I think that's an important place to start, is that we're all part of this system. And I think that's why that relationship with the superintendent is so important, is because it is about every single child in every neighborhood and every school. And I also look at it as the 24% of students that go to independent schools. We are all educating students here in Nashville. We are all part of it. People are living here. People want what's best for their kids. So I look at it as a way of bringing people together. And I think, again, to give a shout out to the school board, they don't get enough credit. And I have my issues with the school board, don't get me wrong, but we have 27 schools, that public charter schools, that are operating well. Some that can be improved, but for the most part, they are doing a very good job. It has been difficult, but not impossible, to have a charter school approved. That has to continue. They've made 3 mistakes in terms of allowing 3 to be approved, but they've shut those down. That is important. But I think in the same token, we need to take that same approach to all of our public schools, is to look at it as where we find success, how do we make sure that blossoms and grows? Where we see struggles, how do we act with urgency, but also with partnership? That's what I see as our vision is. I think charter schools, the original language we helped write, said they were laboratories of learning. And I'm fascinated about the future of charter schools and education reform in this country and really in this city. I pushed us in a direction of partnership with the district. And I lost a lot of support in the charter community because of that. There are people who believe you cannot partner with the district. We have to push back against that. There are also people who will not vote for me because I'm that charter guy, even though I partner with the district and found a way to make those relationships work. We have to push back against that and bring people together. This campaign, I found more people in the middle that just want to find a way to move forward, find a way to be successful, find a way to make the investments in what's working. So let's find out what's working and do more of it. And let's find out what's not working and do it with urgency and partnership immediately. I think that's why I've talked so much about being more creative with what facilities, how we use our school facilities. We saw it at Cameron, where we had 2 schools in the building with 2 different schedules and 2 schools that were ranked amongst the highest improving the last year in operation. That should be a laboratory of learning. And I'm worried right now, no, you guys don't report on it, People don't talk about it. The politicians don't, haven't visited. Parents across the community don't know about the Cameron story. That's something that I will bring to the mayor's office, is saying this is how we made a partnership work. This was with, here are the arrows that Dr. Register got shot with. Here are the nicks in my back that I have in the pound of flesh I lost. This is the way we brought the community along. This is what we did. These are the great ideas we stole from Glencliff that I talked about last night in the after-school programs. So I think it's in all of the above. We're all in this together. I think as mayor, we need someone who understands the intricacies of those politics, of the neighborhoods, of the teachers and the rest of it. But I said it last night and I'll say it again, trusting our teachers is not just spouting some rhetoric. It's not calling yourself a cheerleader or quarterback or anything in between. It's about saying we trust you to give you the flexibility to do what you do best, which is serve kids. It's saying that we trust principals to do what they do best, that they have that flexibility to do it. What that means is you can set your hours of the school day. If you do that, that means that we have to find a way to transport differently. Because right now you have all high schools get out at a certain time, all middle schools, all elementary schools. That's why I think the STRIDE program is so impactful, and we can learn from it, is if we can leverage the MTA bus system with our yellow school bus system, we can allow those principals flexibility around schedule. When we give, like we are right now, the student-based budgeting, that control to our principals and in-house, that means you can pay teachers differently and incentivize them differently. As mayor, I've called for expanding the artistic subsidy for housing to allow teachers, if you live within a certain area around your school, that we would provide some rent subsidy. They've done it in New York, they've done it in other cities. And what it does is exactly what we saw happen with our schools, is that when you have teachers shopping at the same grocery store as their kids and families, you start creating that sense of community. You start realizing that we're all in this together. Co-locations can work. They're tough, they're difficult, but I think we're going to have to navigate those waters going forward as we look at the high growth in Southeast Davidson County in some of our empty buildings or underutilized buildings. It's going to take a mayor who has done that, who understands it is difficult, who knows how to over-communicate and use multiple forms of media and meetings, and understands that you kind of get yelled at for a while, but ultimately that expression is good because you can find a way to be successful.
Just to go back to a portion of my question, what is success after 4 years?
Yeah. No, I think that I think we're moving forward. We see there's undoubtedly a piece where a talent attractor is more people want to come to Nashville to teach. There's a good rivalry with Memphis. They call themselves Teacher Town USA. I don't ever want to be second best to Memphis. And we need folks that want to come here. So how do we attract more people to teach here, to want to work in our school system? That's something I'm so proud of at LEAD, is the number of people that I was able to hire who were not involved in education to get involved in education. Our CEO was an accountant, taught for a few years, managed a group of grocery stores, but is now the CEO of LEAD and doing a great job. Our CFO was at a tech startup, came to LEAD and back at a tech startup. That's the kind of attraction we need, is that education is the most important work we do, and find a way to get more people involved. It's better connections with our higher education system. I think higher ed has gotten a pass for far too long around the country for our K through 12 challenges. I mentioned it last night about Lipscomb University. What an incredible investment that they've made in our community, in our students and their graduates, where if you graduate with an undergrad degree in teaching, you have to have an English language learner certification. That's incredible. How do we leverage Trevecca's social justice background to inspire more people to go into counseling, into community work? How do we work with TSU to help increase that diversity? And I think that's his mayor. So that's talent piece.
Sure. And from a metrics perspective, only because of time, are there any metrics, whether it's graduation rate or whether it's achievement rate, those things that you'd like to see? And do you have any specifics that you have in mind?
Sure. So I think talent's important in who works in the classroom and who's leading our schools. I think undoubtedly test scores, we have to look at that. I think we're in a moment where with Common Core, with the PARCC test and other things, that I wouldn't want to tie a metric around that, knowing that that's still fluid. I think ACT scores are important. I think looking at, they can't be the end-all be-all by any means. We have plenty of kids that are successful in college right now who scored an 18 or 19, but I think we do need a way to measure that success. I think graduation rate is incredibly important. We need to keep pushing that number higher. Attendance rate, without a doubt. I think the performance framework that Dr. Coverstone has created is a good framework. What I would love to see is make that more public in terms of just, I know it's out there, but making sure parents use it as a guide. I would love to see it listing the after-school programs and supports that are involved. We get accused all too often that the reason why we're successful in charters is because we have all this philanthropy. In reality, a lot of it is the flexibility and the extra programs that we partner with our schools. I'd love to see it listed that, say, for example, Dalewood has 52, and I'm making that number up, 52 after-school programs, and their test scores went up. Well, I think we as a public can then look and say, well, I think those 52 programs are working. And while another school may have 52 programs and the test scores went down, we may be able to say we may not have the right programs. I think parent responses is really, really important in that engagement and that feedback. Teachers right now can respond through Tripod, the survey. I think that's important. So it has to have a parent voice, a teacher voice, and a community voice component to it. And I think that framework, right now, I love it because I like data, but we need to find a way to condense it to make it easy to understand. It's in a very sort of cogent, efficient dashboard. I think those are the metrics there around our students coming to schools, making the choices that they want. I think that's important. Are they coming to school when they do, and are they ultimately learning? And I'd love to see us track our students where we go. That's why I was the first one to call for a college counselor in every single high school, not only to help our students while they're in high school, but also track is that as they go to MTSU or Vanderbilt or Stanford, that we're able to see, are we preparing them for that? And we're right now, I know LEAD's tracking that to be able to say they've done a very good job around reading, a very good job around math, some of just the comprehension, just because it's a step up when you have to read 200 pages in college. That's something I know LEAD is looking backwards. That's what great systems do.
About 8 minutes left.
So you have a different set of experiences than the other candidates. Are we funding education adequately here in Davidson County? What's your stance on BEP 2.0? What things can you do as mayor to ensure that we are spending the right amount of money, either we're spending too much, too little, getting it from the right sources?
Right. So take it a couple ways. One, we got to advocate for more money for our ELL population. I think that's incredibly important. Whoever's elected will do that. I think where I bring a difference and advantage is I'm not partisan. I'm not coming as a Democrat, not as a Republican, not ideologically driven. We have to work with Governor Haslam. He is governor. We have.
And so when you say that more money ELL, you're saying from the state?
Correct.
Part of BEP,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
BEP 2.0.
So we need that portion of it. Obviously, I mean, the data and the statistic bear it out. We're surveying the majority of the population and not getting that money. So I think that advocacy is incredibly important, but also the effectiveness of it is even more important, is being able to go up with some credibility, as I would have coming out of education, but also coming where I'm trusted by Republicans and Democrats and not there, with an ideological agenda, but the agenda that this is good for Nashville. Kind of working backwards. Are we spending enough? We'll see. I mean, I think it's one of those questions.
I think the question was, are we spending too much?
Are we spending too much?
Or enough?
Or enough. So what I would say is I think we have to stop looking at it as just a $780 million school budget. We've got to start looking at it as a $1.9 billion school budget, an education budget. If education is the most important thing we do, where are we getting those dollars that are not directly controlled by MNPS? How are we using those to leverage and support our school system? Our transit dollars, how are we utilizing those dollars to help kids and families make the choices that are important to them, get to after-school programs and others? How are we spending our dollars through the Barnes Fund, for example, to make sure we have affordable homes in neighborhoods and how they're connected to schools? So I would want to look at it as, and that goes back to that cabinet meeting, it goes back to my approach to how I would lead as mayor, is we have to stop looking at it as my budget and your budget and start thinking about it as our budget. If we go into it, and you talked about just what does that vision look like, we have a $1.9 billion education budget. I get excited about that. We should get excited about that as a community, and I'm the only candidate for mayor talking that way. We have a $1.9 billion transportation budget, a $1.9 billion affordable housing budget, right? We have to think that these are all connected, and we have to act that way with our investments. I think if we start that way, then we start saying, much like we saw in the ice storm, right, is that our kids are so dependent on the food that is served at school. We have to be better prepared, and Second Harvest stepping up, and I know Fred Carr did a phenomenal job on that, but we learned a lot from that, and we should continue to leverage those resources. The after-school programs, the YMCA, I mean, you think about how incredible they are. Siloam Health Center, when we're talking about diversity of our community and healthcare, how could we put them in Glencliff High School? You know, I know they have a clinic, but that's where a lot of families, they have to come. That's where their process really starts as a citizen of the United States, citizen of Nashville. How do we make that easier to make those connections? We go back to utilizing that school space. We talk about those programs and leveraging it. We only start that process if we look at it as how do we make those investments and make them count. At that point, we may realize we have such incredible redundancies in our transportation system, our facilities, for example, but we can't say that until we go the direction I'm advocating.
I love that. And just a last note on transit, just because we know the two hottest topics are education and transit, and I see how you're weaving all the pieces. So as you look at transit, a lot of people are very reluctant to want to invest in any kind of infrastructure, or lots of buses that nobody might ride, or
Right.
or certainly more roads, et cetera. You just said yourself a future of maybe everybody's driving Ubers, et cetera. I think there's an era of what do we invest in that isn't outdated in 10 years going on too. So are there, what's your vision for some of that? How do you get started at that truly, especially with that interwoven vision that all things are connected?
Right. Well, and I think one thing I'm very excited about watching develop is these zip cars and the personal car services, where you think about it for a day and even days on the campaign trail. I'll drive a car 3 or 4 times. You think about it's probably a total of 2.5 hours, and yet that car is sitting there the whole time. And so if you can pick up a car on a street corner, open your cell phone, and see that there's a car in the neighborhood, you drive it for 30 minutes, you pay for 30 minutes, you leave it, at a corner. Think about how that changes the way you drive, the way you take transportation. I think that, and I've said it repeatedly, the future of transportation is on our cell phone, and how we interact with it, the technology we use, not only to know when a bus is coming, but you look at Waze and just the power of the crowd. And I always tell a story about I-440 and going to 65, and 65 going on to I-440. I am always convinced there is a traffic jam and it's an 18-car pileup. And the reality is everybody brakes because you think you can't go around there. And at the last minute, everybody tries to get over right at the end of that. That's a challenge that we have engineers that can help us figure out. We have technology that can help us figure out, but how do we get people moving faster and help them get where they need to be? So I think technology is a big piece of it. I think we have to look at light rail. I think we have to start looking regionally, even within Davidson County. I've talked about those transfer points that are not just downtown. Leveraging infrastructure, we go back to dollars and how we make sure we manage our debt carefully. We have made some major investments in Hickory Hollow Mall. What about making that a transfer station? I called for that very early on. We have the McDonald Farm property where CHS is going. They need a new interchange with TDOT for Hickory Hollow Parkway. What about making that a park and ride? That today is where you can park and ride a bus. Tomorrow it may be, or 10 years from now, it may be park and ride a light rail. But we start making those interim investments today and leveraging our existing resources. If you do that at Hickory Hollow Mall, you could do it at the airport. You could then do it at Madison Rivergate and even Bellevue Mall. And at that point, you have 4 regional hubs within Davidson County, but yet are very close to Murfreesboro, Lebanon and Wilson County, Sumner County and Hendersonville, and Dixon. So I think that's the way I would think long term, is how do we make these investments with the existing resources that are the park and rides, because ultimately it's not just about getting you where you're going faster, it's about getting cars off the road. And that may be ride sharing, that may be buses, that may be sidewalks and bike lanes, it's all of the above. But ultimately, and I said this in the debate last week, it comes back to our roads. Is right now, at the end of 4 years, and ask me about the metrics on that, no one will have to wonder about my commitment to getting you to and from where you want to be. And that starts with our roads and our potholes, and it has 78% of our roads were acceptable 8 years ago. Today it's 61%. We have to help people get around. We have to make those investments. That goes to sidewalks, it goes to those bike lanes. If we put a light rail system, it's still going to be on a road. So how do we think long-term, but also make those short-term investments and utilize our existing dollars and our existing resources in a smart way today?
So along that, what's the city you think that's doing the best job on that?
I don't think it's any one city. I think I take sort of examples from each one. I think Charlotte has shown how you can have that transit-oriented development. I think the incentives that they gave with their zoning that said we're going to build this rail line, and if you build within a certain area around it, whether it's a school or business or home, and we've seen that development. I mean, you're from that area. We've seen it spring up, and I think that development is really important, and the government being able to say, and I think that's one of the reasons why the AMP, in some ways, didn't catch people's mind or kind of created the controversy. That's why I was an advocate for Charlotte. The transformative power of infrastructure and those investments in transit. You think about transitioning and transforming an industrial corridor of Charlotte, just the same, Charlotte Pike, not Charlotte, North Carolina, but what it could have done and what it could have done for business, what it could have done for neighborhoods, the connections it could have made. I think
It didn't have anything to do with the fact you could walk to Charlotte and you can't walk to Hillsborough?
Me personally?
Yeah.
It had a lot. No, I mean, I think it was. I admit my bias, but I think it was for a lot of folks is what it could have done. It would have been progressive, and I think with West End it was regressive in a way that took away things versus Charlotte that actually created things. I think you look at a place like Denver that's done 3 major projects in the billions of dollars with no federal aid. They just said, we have to do this. The way they did it, and I think that's one thing that we can think of regionally in the future, they looked at an arts and entertainment tax where they found you didn't just come into downtown Denver and stay there. You actually went skiing in the mountains, you went to the Littleton Library, you went to the Arts Museum, and so they did that around a soda tax. I think for us, a corollary may be around education. When we link this way, as you have MTSU in Murfreesboro, you have Cumberland University in Lebanon, Gallatin and Ball State, you start all of a sudden linking regionally, and the regional caucus is already a strong group. I think is just looking for a way to pull that together. Going out to Salt Lake City on the chamber trip was really informative. I admit you're not supposed to do it as a candidate. My mind had sort of gotten trapped in buses because of the AMP discussion and that conversation. And we were out there, and they have buses that people take to get to light rail. And light rail is psychologically just very different. It was packed. There were times where we had to wait for the next train to come because it was too packed. But they did a really important thing is they linked it with their downtown, but they linked it with the University of Utah. And essentially they went and they said, look, how many of parking garages are you going to plan in the next 10 to 20 years? And they said 2, maybe 3. And they said, how many big rich donors can you go to put the Frank Daniels Memorial Parking Garage? And they said 0. And I said, if you invest and get behind this, we can guarantee 1, if not 2 of those parking garages go away. And they have. And what it is now, there's great buildings there that alumni have donated to, but they did that because they saw that students are there, professors are there, people that work there. I mean, look, Vanderbilt's such a huge employer here. I mean, think about those investments with that. We already have the university connector. So I think each of those have a piece of what we can look at. And I'll say it was a moment where I sort of laughed, and I shouldn't have, but someone came up to me and said, I have the best idea for Transit Nashville. We're going to build the elevated walkway and roadways in an L system here above our train lines. And I just thought, oh God, that's the craziest idea I ever thought. And I don't know whether that's ever doable and probably won't ever happen, but it was that idea of someone coming up with something innovative and thinking about it as let's not throw ideas away right now. Let's open ourselves up to being creative, to saying what is Google Fiber going to do for our city? What is Uber and Lyft going to do for our city? What are these zip cars going to do? What are buses going to look like? Because right now, we probably need smaller, more mobile buses as we think about our infrastructure and going forward. We need to have different buses that look different. I've talked a lot about that, of reflecting our creative spirit and getting people engaged in it. What does a bus look like where you can pay with your phone? Where we may have the Music City card that I've advocated for since the beginning. What does that look like with the swipe system? So I think all of that comes back to technology, it comes back to investments, but it ultimately comes down to that connectivity.
Well, we regrettably have to end at this point due to time, but I want to thank Mr. Kane and the editorial board, and also our viewing audience at Tennessean.com. Best of success.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all.